What's up, everyone? This is the Landing Pad Podcast, Arkansas edition with Steve Rice. Thank you for joining me on the show today. My guest today is the inaugural Innovation Fellow in Residence at the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. He holds a Ph.D. from the University of California Berkeley, specializing in interdisciplinary research unpacking how communities value, support, and practice innovation in social justice and international development. He's the co-founder of the Reflex Design Collective, an equity design consultancy that's worked for creative social justice in the Bay Area, and his core aim is to catalyze good social change. I can't wait to learn more about his Arkansas story today on the Landing Pad.
Welcome to the Landing Pad Podcast, Arkansas edition, where we explore what it means to be an Arkansan through the eyes of non-native Arkansans who have landed in and come to love the natural state. All right, Razorbacks and expats, it's time to grab your cheese dip, sweet tea, sit back, and enjoy the show. Now, here's your host, Steve Rice.
Here's Gordon. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
So first of all, can we define a few terms? I think sometimes in academia, we use terms and we become comfortable with terms that are really precise, but can also be confusing or misunderstood for people. So in layman's terms, can you talk to me about what were the disciplines of your research? What did you do and what kind of were the building blocks of that?
Before I even talk about those disciplines, I just want to state that my PhD was weird. It was designed to be weird. It was designed to be eclectic. My graduate program had been doing it since the early 70s. Our discipline and many disciplines around only exists when people realize that a single discipline doesn't have all the answers. So, for example, one of my professors founded the discipline basically of ecological economics. And everyone that's in the field puts things together and works at the intersection of them. My work is at the intersection of innovation practice, evaluation capacity building, and international development and equity. The first one is, the core of that is humans' innate push to understand the process of making new things that are good. For who, for what, in what context, those are all debates that exist in the field all at one time. The second field is the very massive transdiscipline of determining the merit and or value of organized activities. And international development is a very large field that works to understand or critique the systems that are dealing with global poverty. The World Bank, the UN, the Gates Foundation, these are massive institutions that help address that issue. And my work fits in the middle of those three topics. Does that make sense?
It sounds like it's a really complex way of actually getting 3 PhDs and doing the work of 3 PhDs in 3 different disciplines.
You would think so, but that's the reality of why most people don't do a project like this, right? The purpose in many situations of a PhD is not to become an expert of a field. It is to create knowledge. And to do so, being an expert is a means to do so. So when you're a T learner, you are very broad and many different topics around your field. Know just a little bit, and then you know an immense amount of about a very small specific field. When I took my qualifying exam, there was a book that I read, Arthur Koestler's Act of Creation, and one of the main points of doing innovative activity is dissociating. The idea is you take 2 blatantly different topics and you smash them together, and at the interface, something new comes up.
This is really interesting, kind of pivoting this conversation. I want to talk a little bit about equity. Obviously, inequity is such a complex and intersectional problem. When you look at leveraging innovation to affect social justice, is this just economic development, or is this actual systems, infrastructure development as well? When you talk about international development, how do those things all overlap or intersect in your kind of research and practice?
Ooh, you hit on so many things that I want to like go back
pick
into and
any
discuss.
one that
I,
like lights your curiosity, and let's
I'm
track that one
gonna
down.
try to hit every single one. Let's go. Let's make it
go.
happen. So the first thing I wanted to hit on is I'm a linear thinker. I'm a methods nerd. When you do innovation practice, when you do evaluation capacity building, these are knowledge disciplines. These are disciplines used to help expand people's mind about what is possible and how to engage in strategy towards the way forward. They both have done good things in making that happen. But to get to your second question about those conversations around equity is the importance of understanding that if you do not involve social justice in your work and let that influence who you are actually serving and in what way, you're not doing good work.
Can you talk more about what you mean by that, and why social justice, the work of innovation and impact, has to be centered, social justice centered, from your perspective?
Here's a few reasons. There's a spectrum of beneficial activity that one would consider beneficial activity when trying to do this type of important work that many people are trying to do. You can bring up the words of social impact, social entrepreneurship, social innovation. You can bring up equity. You could bring up efficiency. You could bring up justice. You can bring up activism. All of these words are signifiers for how one individual might place themselves across the spectrum of what they consider to be the values that they focus on and how they act out those values. When doing social innovation work, there needs to be consideration for what those values are. Obviously, when you say values, there's the vision for a better world and the mission of how you enact it. There's the vision for what you want to do. And then there's the method you decide to engage in to try and reach that vision. Obviously, they interact with each other and they connect. And there's many people in the world of social impact that I honestly am not the best expert in understanding everything about equity, because it's something that they study. They're the T learners and they're the people on the ground actively doing this work constantly. There's a lot of, when doing these activities, one big question that should be constantly asked is, for whom are you helping when you're doing innovative work? Most of the time, innovation is considered, when you say that phrase, it means you're doing things that are fad-ish. There's a constantly evolving collection of technological developments that are only considered the purview of innovation, which in the work of people that constantly work to make things better for people that are around them in the world, don't take into account the political nature of the work that they're doing, that every single thing that is created, whether technological or no, interacts with society and thus interacts with power in ways that most of the creators of technologies don't want to acknowledge, number one. And number two, there are many different ways that people are constantly innovative that is not considered, one would establish as the global definitions or the star versions of innovative activity. This happens in international development. This happens everywhere in the world, and it's invisible to most people. There's a phrase in international development, global poverty: good intentions kill by themselves. There are many stories that I could discuss and talk about that realize the reality of very large, well-intentioned organizations going into a specific country. They see a problem, they see a part of a problem. That's a reality. Like, you see both what you are exposed to, but what your expertise, experience, and positionality let you see. They suggest and have the funds for and implement those as solution. There's a perfect example of communities. I think it was the World Health Organization, but don't quote me on exactly which organization, went into Bangladesh and realized that there was a huge issue with water. People were drinking dirty water in the basins of the areas where they were trying to find. And they came in and said, okay, so the problem is technological, they have water, so let's build wells for these institutions. They let them in, they built the wells, they left. 10 years later, everyone was dying quicker because the wells that they bore built in arsenic. So when you went deep into the water, the deep wells that were existing, and they did not test, nor did they have the capability to understand why that arsenic was there, and the fact that over years, their intervention did worse than if they would not have been there in the first place. Mm-hmm. One reality of this work that I'm constantly trying to distill and explain is combining these fields and working to try and make things better and understand whether or not you're doing good and helping people at the margins at the most is in almost every single situation, things are much more complex than you think they are. Mm-hmm. There are drastically more shades of gray in the reality of the situation. The truth is in the mosaic of complexity. And to get to a way that you can be useful, beneficial to people in that complexity, you have to acknowledge that and continue to move forward. That's why a lot of the stuff I talk about it is complex, and the abstract can get complex because the big answer, like people are like, well, why don't you just say like, which is it? Like, are you doing social justice? When you're doing social innovation, are you doing social justice as well? Like, do they fit in different worlds? The answer is always, it depends. Mm-hmm. It depends on the situation. It depends on the people you're dealing with. It depends on the history that they've been involved in. It depends on the world that was built before you got there.
And everybody's experience of that world, the same people can have a different experience of the same world in a very different way. The question for me that pops up is when you're looking at real world issues, on the ground issues. Let's take what is happening right now in the world, which we're recording this in the middle of May, and obviously the COVID-19 pandemic is still full throttle basically around the globe. How do you keep moving forward in the face of these really complex situations? You mentioned you recognize, you acknowledge the complexity and still move forward. I ask questions of myself, like, how do I get involved, recognizing my energy and finances and capacity is limited? And your organization, to my outward observation, has pivoted very quickly and very agilely to be able to make some important necessary impact. How do you navigate that in a real world sense?
It depends. Easy. Next question. Obviously, it depends, but it's important to like negotiate exactly how it depends, right? So that people think that I'm not always thinking like highfalutin, abstract, right, bringing in words. The work at the Hub has been very useful personally to find ways and places to ground the deep work that I did during my PhD and make sure that people can benefit. So the Innovation Hub, we did pivot. What we're doing right now, one of the main activities I'm personally doing is running the Arkansas Makers Task Force. Mm-hmm. So as soon as it happened and we realized that we, like many other maker spaces and co-working spaces and educational spaces, of which the Hub is all three and a bit more, could not function because its main value add is physical, tangible recreation, mm-hmm, and inciting of passion. When people aren't in that space, a whole bunch of maker spaces are like, okay, so how do we live? Maker spaces have gone through a swell of being a part of that fad. A lot of people consider it innovation and innovative, and it is on individual lives, but on a global scale, it's a thing that has occurred. People got excited about it, and it's tapered off just a little bit. A lot of makerspaces are struggling. So what we decided is to say, here are our values, here's what we do. We teach, we make, we learn. How can we do that digitally, like everyone else is doing? One big issue that people are addressing is PPE, mm-hmm, personal protective equipment. People need it all over. The powers that be in the United States are not doing anything to make it happen. Whether in private and public environments, it's a wild west out there. Mm-hmm. So while that was occurring, we said, wait, we have a whole bunch of people that have local manufacturing technologies, 3D printers and die cutters and sewing machines that can help with this issue. Let's pool in resources where people can get interested. Here's some other pieces that make it that you should know when doing this type of work. Go forth and make. And they make, we give them places to drop off. We give them communities that they can get in touch with if they're interested in. And a good cadre of people have continued to make over and over, just making face shields, all different types of things. Getting to your second part of your question, it's been both a blessing and exhausting to be at the center of this whirlwind of potential activity. It clues in the reality of how complex this situation is.
Yeah.
It reeks of complexity. It's not yet chaotic. The systems still exist that can help people help out. People are still searching for what truth is and what truth exists, which means there's beautiful opportunity for experimentation. That's what you should be doing. Immediate, quick, iterative experiences where you learn from the crowd. But in doing that, it means that many people that are comfortable, understandably so in our world, have built a comfort and a social contract around having a foundation and feeling safe, having those important things that one would need for human actualization. They don't have that. So what do you do? How do you move? How do you interact? Ingo Rauch has been doing a lot of research on people that are in positions of trying to say, whether externally or internally, how do we adapt? What are things that we go through and how do we move forward? And one big core lesson I continue to learn from him is the fact that it's okay that it's in a transitory period. The more that you accept and understand the physics, the realities of how transition occurs, the better that you can cope through this issue. I saw a funny tweet that was like, you know what I miss? Precedented times. Those were fun because it's all unprecedented. So learning from him about the art of transitioning, Ruha Benjamin, who is a critical race technology researcher. She wrote a book called Race After Technology that just recently put out a video that talked about how everything about this virus in no way, shape, or form is the great equalizer. It is, I think the quote she said, I might bastardize it, but it's traveling and ravaging our society along well-worn paths of inequity. Any and every way that we could consider and couldn't consider, and even in ways that we can't even see.
Yeah.
The ancestor, James Baldwin, that I keep thinking about in all of the sensational work that I'm continuing to learn about, one big point that he continues to make, he says, I must be hopeful. How can I not be? When understanding the world that we're a part of. I got a chance to learn about this. Being a human and engaging in innovation at its core is based in an inherent value of humans' capability to shape the world around them. If they didn't have that belief, innovation would not exist.
Right.
Understanding and acknowledging that though the world, especially for the people on every type of margin, it wasn't good in so many different ways, but is being increasingly more ravaged. But yet people have been through ravaging experiences before, even if institutions have been ravaged, even if land has been lost by indigenous siblings, what have you. People have learned, adapted, evolved, and resistance will constantly occur to make sure that people have the ability to survive. This doesn't just mean in activist spaces. This is like organizations small business owners trying to make sure that they connect and interact and adapt to this new world. These are people understanding that this social ableism that occurs all across the world is something that they have to learn from now from people that have been disabled and said, we've been living this life for our entire lives. Let me teach you a little something about how to live in this new world where systemic and potentially invisible eugenics is the norm. And you have to say, in this world, in understanding these situations, you still want to survive.
Yeah.
You still want to adapt. You still want to evolve. You still want to connect. You still want to be a human. You still want to make things better. The virus is revealing a lot about how systems would work because it is stressing every single one that exists in human existence. But once we have that understanding, at our base level, we're like, I still want to live.
Yeah.
Now, how?
Right.
For the people that are privileged to have some type of expertise, experience, positionality, if you're white, male, straight, if you have money, if you live in a house, if you have a job, if you have resources or whatever in any way, shape, or form, if you have networks, what are things that you can do while ensuring that you keep the mask on yourself? If you're in the plane and the plane's in a crisis mode, right? So there's a lot of answers to that, and the longer answer is it depends. But if we all start from that main course of, yeah, everything is, I'm sorry, mama, everything is shit, but you still want to live. How do you make good where you are? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I want to jump back in and pivot a little bit, kind of now stepping back from the work you're doing, and kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about, like, how did you end up here? How did you end up at the Innovation Hub? How did you come to Arkansas? Like,
the fun stories. Yeah. So before I was in Arkansas, I was in Botswana. I'm originally from Maryland. Went from Maryland to school in Atlanta at Morehouse College, then Ann Arbor, Michigan at the University of Michigan, and then to school in Berkeley. And while I was there in all these different places, I also, every single summer, I was interning in a new place. I interned at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, at MIT, at Michigan before I actually went on campus, at NASA Glenn Research Center. I interned at the General Motors in the Corvette plant. And then after I started my PhD work, I had a chance, a very small amount of time, I was potentially doing work in Kenya. And then I started my dissertation work over 2 years. I spent 9 total months in Botswana over 4 trips. Now, coming from Botswana, I applied to 5 billion jobs every single day, just questioning my value based on whether or not I could get a job in a little bit of time. That MIT research project gave me a network position with Dr. Christopher Jones, who, as people might know, is the current executive director of the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. He realized that my field of research shifted to the type of academic work that would deeply align with what the hub might want to go in the direction of. And he said, look, what can we do together? Let's figure it out. I'm like, let's figure it out. He brought me on, and in October, I started in a position, I basically call myself a guinea pig. For academics, it's kind of like an applied postdoc. And from that, I had the chance to connect and interact with this place, constantly trying to help local community members interact with resources and community that could help them better themselves in unique ways. How to ensure that your values, equity or otherwise, are core of that work, that community participation is deeply considered, and in trying to use the weird fields I've brought together and bring them to bear to help build the world into a better version of itself.
Kind of wrapping this, or kind of tying a bow on this, being in Arkansas over the last 6 to 8 months, 9 months that you've been here, what have you observed, and what are you most excited about in the coming months and year ahead?
I'm gonna have to think about this one. Before I talk about the excitement, I gotta talk about the worry. I gotta talk about the concern, because that's what top like hit in my head at first, like in this wild world we're a part of, and how people are endangering it in many ways. I'm excited to hear about and help the people that want to help. I want to help the people that want to help. One thing that we absolutely need more of are people that help in this world, and just want to keep doing that. It's a part of their soul, it's part of their work, and I want to help them help that. Trying to do my best and help other people to make a better world than the one that we existed in before. I just looked online that probably 100,000 people in the U.S. are going to die. Probably more. Who knows what the next days are going to come up with, right? And it did not have to be this way. The best time to plant a tree is 50 years ago. The second best time is now. And we must not get bogged down in thinking that a world of superheroes is okay. Because once there are many other issues that make the world better for everyone, for marginalized communities in many ways, people will rise to the occasion to address the next issues that need to be addressed.
I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me, and your passion and the intellect and drive that you have brought to bear for our state. The difference that you're making here already is inspiring, and in the face of these challenges that we've dived into today. But I appreciate you coming on the show today.
I deeply appreciate being here.
If you enjoy the show, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow. And I'd certainly appreciate a rate or review to help others find the show. Please join me next week for another Arkansas story here on the Landing Pad Podcast.